Thank you. The next item of business is the debate on motion 20730 in the name of Polly McNeill on community policing. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Polly McNeill to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 7 minutes, please.
I move the motion in my name. Vital to any high-performing justice system is a well-trusted, visible police service. Scotland's police force is respected across the world, but there can be no doubt that in the past 19 years, the SNP's lack of leadership and investment has reduced public confidence and eroded the police's ability to respond to all types of crime. Police offices closing, dwindling, police numbers and crimes not being responded to. People want to see and feel the presence of the police, and that must mean in all Scotland's communities. Our communities must know that the police will turn up when crime is reported and know that it will be investigated to the highest standards. Violent crime in Scotland is rising, as well as sexual crimes including rape, attempted rape, domestic abuse and weapons offences. The increase in the carrying of weapons is understandably causing fear in communities. Will Linden, the Deputy Head of the Violence Reduction Unit, stated that the biggest challenge we have is increasing the carrying of weapons. In the 12 months to April last year, weapons were found 231 times during searches in children, the highest total in 8 years, and a 10-year-old boy in Edinburgh was the youngest person to be caught with a knife. The Violence Reduction Unit said that he's worried, Jimmy Paul, the Violence Reduction Unit, said he's worried that recent trends with young people viewing violent content online and using social media to organise fights. We're seeing more younger children getting involved in violence, 8, 10 and 11-year-olds, and less of the older age group, and that is of concern, he said. So Scottish Labour believe that strengthening community policing is an essential part of the strategy to deal with children so young. Scottish Labour would restore at least 360 police officers to the frontline and local divisions, boosting community policing teams. And this would mean that every council ward in Scotland will have a named officer who will build relationships in the community and gather intelligence on crime with local areas. This is what we believe is vital to fighting this type of crime, is building relationships in our communities. But we will also reduce the amount of time that police officers have to spend stuck in A&E through our new mental health response service. Scotland's police officers are having to deal with almost 700 mental health-related incidents every single day. Between April and October last year, police officers responded to over 122,000 incidents, which represented 1 in 5 of all incidents police officers attend. But the vast majority of these calls do not involve criminality. Expecting police officers to fill the gap of a struggling NHS service is placing a huge strain on already stretched police force. So, as part of our plan to combine NHS 24 and the Scottish Ambulance Service into a strengthened emergency response help board, Scottish Labour would create a dedicated mental health response division. This will be a default blue light service for mental health crisis calls, reducing the number of police calls required for Police Scotland. It was only this week that David Kennedy, head of the Police Federation, said that the police are expected to operate like a nanny force, he said, plugging gaps in social services, and this is leaving communities without adequate protection from serious crime. It is reported that 80% of call-outs now involve no criminality, with police time increasingly taken up by public safety concerns, well-being checks and mental health crises. This has simply got to end. But it is no surprise, therefore, that police morale is at an all-time low. Police officers must be allowed to do the job that they are trained for and that the public expect. But our police service has been hollowed out since its creation 13 years ago. Police Scotland has made savings of over £1 billion, but it hasn't been allowed to reinvest any of these savings back into our police force. The police estate has been decimated, with a staggering 150 police stations closed in the last 2 years. The public consensus is that this is compromising community safety, and there are some crimes for which the police still do not actually turn up. It's called proportionate response to crime. It is unacceptable that Scotland was the last force in the UK to roll out body-worn cameras. It's really important for police officers to be able to fight crime with the best way and the best equipment. And in Scotland, they haven't been able to do this. So given all of this, it is unsurprising that so many officers are choosing to leave their career early. And this is what I think is the most vital aspect of policing today. More than 1,700 police officers have quit the profession in the last 2 years. Officers are leaving at the rate of 16 every week. Too many police officers are disillusioned and therefore leaving jobs, or they're taking early retirement. So we need to start making police officers feel properly valued. We need to reverse this trend. Because there are over 1,000 fewer police officers now than when Police Scotland formed back in 2013. So it is no surprise, therefore, that it's having an impact on those police officers who are currently serving. The Scottish Police Federation has said that the Government's budget, as drafted, falls well below what is needed to stabilise officer numbers and meet rising demand, and we have still to see the full impact of that. I believe the most significant task ahead is the challenge of so many officers have said leaving the job early. We must invest properly in the service to sustain police numbers. We must properly support police officers. We must reduce the practice of cancelling leave so that we have a strong, well-equipped police force that is serving in communities which see that their police officers and that their police service is visible to them.
Thank you, Ms McNeill. And I call on Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance to speak to and to move Amendment 20730.1. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Let me start by thanking Police Scotland officers and staff for their dedication in keeping our communities safe. The Scottish Government recognises their vital role, which is why, building on last year's record investment of £1.64 billion for policing, we will be investing a further record funding of over £1.7 billion in 26-27. And this includes uplifts for both resource and capital funding and will allow Police Scotland to deliver on their priorities, including frontline service delivery. Our investment in policing has enabled Police Scotland to take on more recruits in the last financial year than at any time since 2013. Police Scotland has confirmed a healthy recruitment pipeline, welcoming around 1,840 new officers since the beginning of 2024. In addition, as of 30 September 2025, there were around 30 full-time equivalent officers per 10,000 of the population, compared to 24 full-time equivalent officers per 10,000 in England and Wales. And I'm sure everyone will welcome that our police officers are receiving the best basic pay in the UK at the minimum and maximum of each rank. Public safety and crime statistics are a key measurement of the effectiveness of policing. The latest published statistics from September show recorded crime had halved from its peak in 1991, and since we came to office it has reduced by 38%. Last year's Scottish Crime and Justice Survey showed that the proportion of adults who felt safe walking alone after dark in their local area increased from 66% in 2008-9 to 75% in 23-24. The proportion who worried they'd be physically assaulted in a public place fell from 31% to 15%, and the proportion who thought people carrying knives was common in their area fell from 22% to 13%. However, Presiding Officer, I completely understand that perceptions and experiences of safety can vary from area to area, and it is therefore important that we talk about the facts when we talk about crime and policing all in the round, both in terms of the long-term trajectories and, of course, more recent changes, because we need to use that information to understand the changing nature of crime. Presiding Officer, the Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act in 2012, which created our National Police Service, also ensures full operational independence, meaning how and where officers are deployed are matters for the Chief Constable. The Act also ensures that local authorities have a say on shaping the priorities in their area, and that is now better than it was in the past. And I recognise that community policing is a vital part of keeping our communities safe. which is why I welcome that is front and centre in both Police Scotland's 3-year business plan and on their strategic policing plan. Turning to the wider justice system, Presiding Officer, the Victims, Witness and Justice Reform Act places victims and witnesses at the heart of a modern and fair justice system and includes significant new measures to meet the needs of survivors of sexual offences. This Act is part of a continually evolving justice landscape in which our police are very much at the heart. Presiding Officer, we all want to ensure that our officers have the time to police. And there are significant endeavours to protect officers' time and to better deploy officers through a range of initiatives that reduce unnecessary demand on policing and ensure people receive the most appropriate support. For example, the Distress Brief Intervention Programme, and also the strengthening of the enhanced mental health pathway underpinned by investment of £18.5 million for NHS 24, with referrals up by 36%. For my part, I will keep pushing for pace and scalability. And alongside this, there is summary case management, is streamlining the criminal justice processes by reducing avoidable court attendances, enabling cases to be progressed more efficiently and minimising time officers spent waiting at court. And we will recall that the pilot programme demonstrated that there were 500 summary trials not required to be fixed, and this ensured that 18,000 witnesses, including 11,000 police officers, did not have to attend court. And the rollout of summary case management, the digital evidence sharing capability and body-worn video are all vital reforms. And these initiatives, Presiding Officer, will go a long way with many others to ensure that mean officer hours are being released, allowing greater focus on visibility and frontline and community policing, crime prevention and protecting the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I call on Liam Kerr to speak to and move Amendment 20730.2. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. You can't fix a problem if you don't first acknowledge that it exists, which is why the Pollyanna contribution that we've just heard from the Cabinet Secretary is so concerning, because the fact is that crime is rising and people out there know it. Recorded crime up 2%, non-sexual violent crime up 3%, sexual crime up 7%. Presiding Officer, nearly 1 in every 5 adults in Scotland were a victim of at least one crime in 2023-2024. And surprisingly, for a Cabinet Secretary so fond of comparisons, she omitted to mention that you're more likely to be a victim of violent crime in Scotland than you are in England and Wales. And Presiding Officer, the Cabinet Secretary's amendment completely deletes any reference to police numbers. So let me remind her, there are around 1,000 fewer officers today than there were in 2020. It's actually, despite nearly 20 years of manifesto promises, warm words, targets, it's basically the same number of officers as there were in 2007. And since police officer applications show steep falls, whilst resignations and retirements are rising, the situation shows no sign of reversal. So what's the impact of that? Well, Police Scotland now has over 900 fewer police officers with a decade or more's experience than there was in 2019. And of those who are there, we have 1 in 7. That's more than 2,300 on light or modified duties due to illness or injury. Now, it's no wonder that Audit Scotland reported last month there is no evidence that the current complement of officers and staff are the right numbers for future policing demand. And the Cabinet Secretary's proud boasts about funding? Well, David Kennedy of the SPF said recently, if ministers want a police service that prevents crime, supports victims and responds when communities need it, they must fund policing at the level required. What is that level? Well, the Chief Constable told us in the budget and said that that sum would strengthen the front line by funding 850 officers and 348 staff. This government's budget response, £15 million less than requested. So credit to the Labour motion for not only identifying the problems, but also proposing solutions, because there is a need to restore community policing. We set it out in our justice policy in December to boost confidence in the police, to keep people safe, to reduce antisocial behaviour and crack down on crime. But I worry to the Labour motion that to call for the creation of community and crime prevention officers in every council ward in Scotland might risk stretching already limited police resources and forcing policing into a rigid structure that might not match the local need. I've also added in my amendment a further solution. You see, the SPF has warned officers of spending between 40% and 60% of operational capacity dealing with health-related incidents. And that means huge amounts of police time diverted away from tackling crime because of wider public sector challenges that the Scottish Government's also refusing to address. So in my amendment and my Justice paper, I address this through the adoption of a right care, right person style model, which is about focusing police time on crime and public safety. In brief, if there's risk, police attend. If it's a health issue, health professionals take the lead. Now, here's a comparison for the Cabinet Secretary. This model has saved nearly 19,000 hours every month for the Met and nearly 5,000 hours every month in Essex. Presiding Officer, Scottish Conservatives agree with the motion that before identifying solutions, we must recognise the problems caused by nearly 2 decades of failing SNP government. But having done so, the solutions become clear. We would back our police officers, we'd stop wasting their time, we'd ensure they're visible in their communities, we'd give them the powers they need to do their job. And that's what the amended motion would deliver, and that's why I move the amendment in my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Clare. And I call on Maggie Chapman to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Excuse me. When we talk about community policing, what we're really talking about are the values that we think should be at the heart of our communities. What we are talking about is safety. Safety is not simply the absence of crime. It's the presence of justice, of dignity and of trust. That must be the foundation of how we approach policing in our communities. Much is often made of violent crime, and it is right that we take harm seriously. But we also need honesty and perspective. Long-term trends do show that recorded violent crime in Scotland has generally fallen over recent decades. That matters because it challenges the narrative of constant escalation that is so often used to justify fear-based policies. It reminds us that safety cannot be built on panic, sensationalism or punitive reflexes, but on evidence, prevention and care. At the same time, however, perceptions of safety tell a more complicated story. Many people, particularly women, racialised communities, LGBTQIA+ people, disabled people, still feel very unsafe in their daily lives. That fear is real. But responding to it requires us to understand where risk truly lies and to tackle its root causes: poverty, inequality, trauma, exclusion, and the erosion of public services that once held communities together. Nowhere is the gap between rhetoric and reality clearer than in how we respond to racism and the rise of the far right. In the North East, far-right groups have sought to organise and intimidate. Last year, Aberdeen's anti-racism march, in its 20th year, was attacked by members of a known racist and anti-immigrant group. They verbally and assaulted people attending a peaceful community event. The police did not prevent the confrontation, nor did they effectively stop it while it was happening. Anti-racists stepped in to protect one another. That is not policing by consent. That is a failure of protection. And we've seen armed police deployed to arrest peaceful protesters demonstrating against the genocide in Palestine, protesters who were later cleared of wrongdoing in court. Communities are left asking, what are the police up to? What about proportionality and priorities? Why does peaceful protest appear to attract a heavy response while racist intimidation appears to go unchallenged? And what of consistency in the application of laws around stirring up hatred? At anti-immigrant demonstrations, individuals have openly called for the mass deportation of all black and brown people from Scotland. They've repeated anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, or worse. They've been patterns of harassment, people followed, targeted, subjected to malicious allegations. Are we waiting for serious bodily harm before intervention is deemed justifiable? Where is the bar for recognising intimidation and instigation? Police Scotland must take seriously their responsibilities for rebuilding trust. Protecting free speech and the right to peaceful assembly must mean protecting those who stand against racism, not leaving them to defend themselves. Taking hate seriously means acting early, consistently and visibly Community policing must mean standing up with those targeted by hate, not treating them as collateral in a public order calculation. Of course, policing does not exist in isolation, and I do appreciate Labour's comments about officers being pulled into supporting people in mental health crisis or waiting for court processes to happen. This isn't fair or right either. If we are serious about community safety, we must think across portfolios: mental health provision, anti-poverty work, youth services and housing. Prevention is not a slogan, it requires investment. And we must also be honest about where risk is shifting. For many, cybercrime, online fraud and digital exploitation now pose greater threats than stranger violence. If we misread risk, we misallocate resources. So in closing, Presiding Officer, community policing must be rooted in equality, justice, accountability and compassion. If we want trust, we must earn it through consistency, protection of rights and a commitment to tackle harm wherever it arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. And I now call Liam MacArthur to open on behalf of Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I too thank Polly McNeill for bringing this debate to the Chamber today. There really can be no doubting that both the pressures on policing across Scotland or the impact this is having on local communities against a backdrop of increasing complexity in the crime landscape, taking robust and urgent action to address these pressures is critically important. The decline in police numbers, of course, is one important aspect of this debate, and colleagues have rightly highlighted how workforce pressures are most keenly felt in neighbourhood policing capacity. I certainly see this in my own Orkney constituency, where overall numbers are at a bare minimum, with ongoing recruitment challenges. And of course, it's crucial that local forces are properly staffed to ensure policing is effective, of course, but also to maintain morale within the service and confidence amongst the wider public. Worryingly, in Police Scotland's 2025 local policing survey, only 23% of respondents thought the police dealt with local issues. In the latest Scottish Crime and Justice survey, less than half of respondents thought the police were effective at preventing crime. Now, I recognise that Bobbies on the Beat does not necessarily reflect the modern demands on police and policing. But when officers aren't visible in local areas, when certain crimes are not being investigated as a matter of course, community policing is difficult to sustain. In return, public confidence starts to erode. Add to that the inability to call to report an incident to the local police station, assuming it's not already closed. And it's not hard to see how tensions can arise between police and local communities. To be clear, this is not a criticism of officers and staff. They are stretched to the limits, being asked to do more with less, or at least with resources that are failing to keep pace with growing demands. Little wonder we're seeing, as Polly McNeill identified, officers and staff leaving the force in sizable numbers, stripping away both capacity but also invaluable expertise. One of the most notable pressures is the significant rise on non-criminal health and care work. As we've heard, the force is facing almost 700 mental health-related incidents per day, with the Federation highlighting that officers can spend entire shifts with an individual detained under place of safety orders. Essentially, the police are plugging gaps in our health and care system, a crisis care of last resort. This is not in the interests of vulnerable individuals who need appropriate and often specialist support, nor officers who are consequently diverted from prevention and detection of crime. It's not a safe nor sustainable position and requires urgent redress from ministers. Meantime, inefficiencies in the court system, where delays and repeat adjournments take officers away from frontline duties, simply compound the problems. Chief Constable Joe Farrell estimated in 2024 this could involve as many as 500 officers a day, with only 15% ultimately giving evidence. Again, this is in no one's interest and demands to be addressed. Community policing relies on visibility, stability and building trust. That requires officers to be present in communities, both to respond to crime but also to engage in prevention, working closely with other local partners. This has always been a great strength of policing in Scotland, but it faces a pretty existential threat right now. Again, can I thank Pauline McNeill for giving us the chance to shine a light on these issues and urge the Government to take the urgent steps needed to safeguard the critically important aspect of policing here in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr MacArthur. We now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. I call Davy Russell to be followed by Roland Mackay. Mr Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Often the party opposite like to hide behind carefully chosen statistics that hide the real situation on the ground and how people are feeling. But here, the numbers speak for themselves. As mentioned earlier in this chamber, 1,000 fewer officers since Police Scotland established, many of whom are on clerical duties because they've done away with many of the support staff, which ties in with the complaints I get about never seeing a police officer. And at the moment, just this quarter, there are 25 fewer officers than last quarter. Crime's up 2%, violent crime up 3%, sexual crime up 7%, and those statistics are reflected exactly on the ground. It's not fear that people feel, Presiding Officer. They feel alone because they know that when they're in need of police assistance, help is just that little bit further away than it should be, if it comes at all. Larkhall Police Station, in my own constituency, is set to close its doors for public access, and is the same as in neighbouring constituencies of Bellshill and Blantyre, which basically is tying in with this pattern. You know, local services closing. Had a bank closed recently, which affects the vulnerable in society, and now the police station is set to follow suit. People are worried that their town, which is not insubstantial, 15,000 people in Larkhall, and it supports a further 15,000 in the surrounding rural areas, is being forgotten. Have the SNP government forgot about the community spirit when the heart keeps getting ripped out of small towns and the people they were elected to serve? It's shameful that such vital services are falling by the wayside and the Scottish Government is doing nothing about it. If you speak to people in Larkhall, they will tell you that either now you have to travel to Hamilton or take justice into your own hands, or just don't bother complaining and just be a victim of the crime. I am told that Hamilton Police Station actually doesn't have the desk manned in the evening. So, you know, I don't know where we'll go with that. But I wonder which of those options the Justice Minister would like to suggest my Larkhall constituents take, because really, I don't know what to tell them. Starving vital police services of essential funding is not like the mismanaging of the health services, Presiding Officer. Families can't go private like they have to with hip replacements. It's clear that the SNP don't have a plan to make our streets safer. A lack of community policing, in fact any policing, is going to lead to more antisocial behaviour and people will feel less safe in their homes. Scottish Labour will restore that much-needed investment in community policing with a named officer responsible for every council ward, as mentioned before. If constituents want to feel safe where they live, they need to kick the current SNP government out in May, because this government actually don't care about what the people are there, about the people they're there to protect. But sorry. But if you vote for the SNP and independence, it will be utopia, the Garden of Eden and heaven all rolled up into one. Aye, right. They can con some people some of the time, but the people of Scotland are finally beginning to see this government for what it's actually doing to wreck essential public services and break community spirits. We in Scottish Labour will fight this every step of the way.
Thank you, Mr Russell. I now call Rona Mackay to be followed by Claire Baker. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Community policing matters to us all. It brings significant benefits by strengthening trust, visibility and collaboration between police and the public. Those are not my words, Presiding Officer, but the words of Stuart Murray, the Community Policing Chief Inspector in Eastern Bartonshire, whose team works closely with residents and business, doing exactly what the role of community police should. For the last decade, I have witnessed local community police in my constituency addressing issues proactively, whether that's shoplifting through targeted patrols, partnership with retailers, or reducing youth disorder by building positive relationships and offering early interventions. Although I do take the point Polly McNeill made about younger children carrying weapons, which is very concerning. As Stuart Murray says, regular engagement, including holding community surgeries in the form of pop-ups across the Eastern Bartonshire area, helps residents feel heard and supported while providing accessible opportunities to share concerns. This approach not only improves safety and reassurance, but also empowers communities to play an active role alongside their local problem-solving policing teams. Presiding Officer, there has been no decline in this area of policing in Strathkelvin and Bearsden over the years. If anything, it's been stepped up incrementally, which brings me to the Labour motion. I just don't believe it's representative of what's happening on the ground. I'm sure it's not perfect, but I don't think my constituency will be that unusual. Police Scotland are operationally independent, of course, but in reality, the SNP has delivered a higher number of police officers per capita than England and Wales. In addition, the 26-27 Scottish Budget is delivering record investment of over £1.7 billion for police services, and Police Scotland's 3-year plan includes a number of measures aimed at enhancing community policing to help keep our communities safe. That includes preventing and reducing crime and offending, as well as striving to transform societal attitudes and circumstances that contribute to the perpetuation of harm. Delivering high-quality and efficient public services through a range of initiatives has been planned, including, as we've heard, the rolling out of body-worn video technology and digital evidence-sharing capability, game-changing technologies that will increase public confidence in policing. On retail crime, funding for the Retail Crime Task Force has also been maintained at £3 million, supporting efforts to prevent shop-based theft and pursue those responsible. In addition, Scottish Government funding has allowed Police Scotland to take on more recruits in the most recent financial year than at any time since 2013. As we've heard, as of December last year, there were 16,416 officers. And it is for the Chief Constable, under the scrutiny of the SPA, to deploy these officers, and they've been clear on the importance and priority of recruitment during evidence given to the Criminal Justice Committee. Presiding Officer, the SNP Government cares deeply about crime and the safety of those living here. Indeed, levels of recorded crime have decreased by 38% since 2006, and homicide is at its lowest level since comparable records began in 1976. In September last year, Parliament passed the landmark Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Act, which will introduce reforms to place victims and witnesses at the heart of the justice and the courts system. But of course, it should never be forgotten that the Labour UK Government's employer national insurance increase costs Police Scotland over £25 million every year, and that is a considerable impact on any budget planning. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I'd like to congratulate our hard-working officers carrying out their duties with empathy and efficiency every day to keep us all safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. I now call Claire Baker to be followed by Douglas Ross. Ms Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. So we know that people want to feel safe in their communities. They want to know that when they call the police, they will come, and they want visible officers on their streets who know their neighbourhoods, know the issues and can act early to prevent harm. When people tell us they no longer feel comfortable walking after dark, and when surveys show that a sense of safety is at its lowest recorded level, we do have to listen. The issues raised in our motion today are the concerns that people are bringing to us, the local shops that are repeatedly targeted, the parks and community centres damaged by vandalism, and the sense that visible policing in their community has thinned out. We know that officer numbers has fallen, and many areas have seen stations closed or hours restricted, eroding the visible local footprint that is a key part of community reassurance and confidence in policing. The reality is that reductions have fallen hardest on local divisions, leaving fewer officers available for frontline roles. While some benefits exist in the centralisation of policing, we cannot ignore the impact on people's confidence and on the prevention of crime. Officers are expected to cover far more than core policing work. They are responding to mental health crisis, spending hours in A&E because other services are simply not available, and backfilling gaps caused by systematic delays elsewhere in our justice and health systems. In 2024, the Chief Superintendent, Derek McEwen, former Divisional Commander of Fife, said to local councillors that most of the work was now non-crime related. Every hour spent on these duties is an hour not spent preventing crime, building relationships or reassuring communities. I hear regularly from constituents about persistent antisocial behaviour, including in bus stations, on high streets and in parks. Local community safety partnerships are working hard with Police Scotland, but the scale of demand remains acute. Vandalism, deliberate fires and hostile behaviour are not minor nuisances, they are the daily lived reality for many families and businesses that also come with clean-up and repair costs. Shoplifting and retail theft are another source of concern, and they particularly impact on small and local retailers. It is no comfort to victims to be told a crime is low level when it affects their livelihood and contributes to a wider sense of disorder. During USDAW's Freedom from Fear Week, and I am an USDAW member, I spoke to retail workers in my local cooperative and heard of the daily challenges they face. In Mid Scotland and Fife, there is also a long-standing issue of off-road bikes and quad bikes, which I have raised many times with the Government, with these vehicles being used in ways that threaten pedestrians, intimidate families in their local parks and disrupt daily life. And unfortunately, this is a persistent issue in Fife that has again recently been raised with me in Methil. There is some good local work taking place, but simply police do not have the capacity to respond as quickly or as consistently as they would like, leaving people to report these activities frustrated at a perceived lack of response. So community policing, where officers are embedded in their wards, that they know the people in the places and they work with partners to intervene early, is one of the most effective tools we have to reduce harm before it escalates. A new divisional commander, John Anderson, recently took up a post in Fife, and he has spoken of the move to an operating model that moves away from reactive policing to prevention and problem solving, and having dedicated community and crime prevention officers would make that shift. Community policing works when officers are visible, accessible and able to act early. It's about prevention and enforcement. It is also about knowing who the repeat offenders are and also knowing the young person who might be diverted away from trouble. We must also look beyond policing to improve the justice system so that officers are not tied up in court for extended periods, and to ensure that our mental health services have capacity to respond effectively so that responsibility does not have to fall always on police officers. Our police officers work extremely hard. They want to be out in communities preventing crime and keeping people safe. We owe it to them and to the public to make sure that is where their time is best spent. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Baker. I call Douglas Ross to be followed by Fulton McGregor. Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I remind the Chamber of my declaration of interest that my wife is a police sergeant in Murray. I always come to these debates very keen to praise the efforts of our hard-working and dedicated officers locally and right across Scotland, but seeking to put their views into the debate. And a number of points that I am going to raise today have come directly from officers who are concerned. But if they have switched on and are watching this debate or are going to catch up later, I think they should be aware of their government's position. Because I want to make it very clear what the SNP are asking MSPs to vote for tonight. And I'll give way to Angela Constance if she'd like to explain her reasoning. Because the government amendment deletes this sentence. And I'm just not sure what's wrong with the sentence, because it is 100% factually correct. So why does this Justice Secretary and this SNP government want to delete the sentence that says, regrets the cuts to police officer numbers have disproportionately fallen on local divisions, reducing the number of officers on the front line? Can the Cabinet Secretary explain her rationale for deleting that? We know it's true. Therefore, does the SNP Justice Secretary not regret the falling number of police officers on the front line? I know she's not looking at me and she doesn't want to engage in a debate. I'm using my 4 minutes to offer a debate, so I'll ask again to the Justice Secretary. Well, I'm offering my time to the Cabinet Secretary.
Members, I think it's clear the Cabinet Secretary is not seeking to intervene, so I would suggest to Mr Ross that he continue.
I don't think it is clear at the moment, which is why I'm going to give the Cabinet Secretary another opportunity. She has taken a very clear position to delete the words that this SNP government and every SNP member supporting this amendment doesn't regret cuts to police officer numbers and the impact that's having on local policing and local divisions. So because the Cabinet Secretary has moved the amendment in her name, I ask again, does this SNP Justice Secretary not regret the falling number of police officers here in Scotland and the impact that's having on local policing?
I think it's clear, Mr Ross, now that the Cabinet Secretary is not seeking to intervene. So you've only got members only got 4 minutes. So we're at 2:36.
I'm happy to use my time in this way because I think actually the silence is very telling. Angela Constance came in here and gave a speech that everything was fine. There's nothing to worry about. There is something to worry about. If our Justice Secretary in Scotland has no regrets over the number of police officers falling and the impact that's having on local policing, I think that's an issue. I think it's an issue for SNP MSPs to vote for an amendment tonight that deletes that point, because this is having an impact. Because I asked some local officers in Murray about the level of policing in the area, and I was told just a few years ago, before the establishment of Police Scotland, we would have 8 officers per shift in Elgin. We now have 8 for the whole of Murray, and sometimes even less. So for one town, you got 8. Now for Elgin, for Forres, for Lossy, for Buckie, for Keith, and all the rural communities, you get 8 in total. Yet we have a Justice Secretary who doesn't regret that.
Members,
sorry, I don't
concluding.
have time. I know that. I don't have time. But I really think it has been telling, even in my 4 minutes, that the Justice Secretary would rather stay silent about these cuts and admit if she doesn't regret them, she should. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I now call Fulton McGregor. Mr McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to also contribute in this debate on community policing, a subject that speaks directly to how people across Scotland experience safety, reassurance and connection in their everyday lives. And the Scottish Government recognises the importance of community policing, which at its heart allows security, trust and partnership to flourish in the communities across the country. And with that in mind, the Government remains firmly committed to investing in policing and public safety, as we've already heard from the Cabinet Secretary. The funding through this year's budget enables Scotland to maintain one of the highest ratios of police officers per capita in the UK. As of December 25, more than 16,400 officers were serving communities, giving Police Scotland the scale and flexibility needed to respond effectively to local and national demands. And that strong foundation matters because community confidence grows when people see officers who know their area, understand local concerns and engage regularly with residents. And that's something that I think we're all agreed on today, everybody who's spoken. In North Lanarkshire, in particular my constituency of Coatbridge and Christen, I don't recognise actually a lot of the descriptions that other members have given, and that's not me saying that I disagree with that, because that might well be the case in their areas. I actually more associate myself with the remarks of Rona Mackay, because I have good relationships with the local police officers in my local constituency. I see the work that they do. They're in and out of schools, for example, youth services. They often do football tournaments with local kids, and they're around and about and quite visible. They've got good relationships with local councillors and the like. And I think this collaborative approach actually helps identifying emerging issues, supports preventive action and builds lasting trust. I had some concerns actually initially about police officers being in schools, but those concerns were actually put to ease quite quickly when I went out to Coatbridge High and St Andrews in my constituency and met up with the officers there. They're not there in the sort of typical police fashion. They're there to support young people who might be experiencing difficulties, and I think that it actually works really well, and they've got great relationships. So I know also an example I wanted to give, that Coatbridge community police officers have hosted community drop-ins and even worked alongside the Fire and Rescue Service and other agencies in delivering the Junior Cop Good Citizen programme, which seeks to inform young people about respecting the community fire safety, online safety, respecting relationships and road safety. So loads of good work going on. And in fact, the issue about online, whenever primary schools in my constituency have had issues with online bullying or whatever the case might be, they've actually been able to get the local community cops in to speak to the young kids to great effect as well. So I've known that's happened on at least a couple of occasions. So the Scottish Government is also investing in modern technology to support officers in their work. The rollout of body-worn video cameras, as Polly McNeill's mentioned, and digital evidence sharing systems in improving efficiency, enhancing officer safety and strengthening public confidence. And by reducing administrative burdens and streamlining processes, these innovations allow officers to spend more time in their communities, engaging directly with the people they serve. And support for community policing also relies on recognising the wide range of situations they respond to every day, In the Justice Committee, we've looked a lot at the issues around about police officers responding to mental health crisis points and issues. And I do agree with Polly McNeill when she spoke earlier about, I think in the Justice Committee has done a lot of work on this, and we do need to look at areas where there's overlap and working jointly with NHS services in order to perhaps take that particular demand away from them, because I know that's a particularly difficult set of circumstances for officers often. Targeted initiatives also demonstrate how focused investment can deliver tangible results. The Retail Crime Task Force, for example, supported by £3 million in funding, has already made a measurable impact in tackling shoplifting and supporting retail workers. And by combining visible policing with intelligence-led operations, the task force will strengthen safety and confidence across
Mr McGregor, you need to bring your remarks to a close, please.
Sorry, I've ended up talking so much about the local...
Yes, if you just could bring your remarks to a close.
I will close it there then, thank you.
Thank you, Mr McGregor. We now move to closing speeches. I call on Maggie Chapman to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to begin by thanking Pauline McNeill for bringing this debate. While we won't be supporting her motion at decision time, I do share her frustration at the persistence of certain types of crime and the feeling shared by too many that our streets are not as safe as they once were. But as we draw this debate to a close, I want to return to a simple but powerful truth. Safety, that safety we wish would return to our streets, cannot be separated from justice. A society that leaves people behind, that criminalises distress and that tolerates hatred will never be a truly safe one, no matter how many officers it deploys. I do not agree that having officers in every ward is necessarily the panacea it's presented to be. I don't believe we can talk about community policing without talking about the wider systems that shape it. Its officers, our officers, if they are spending hours in A&E departments with someone in mental health crisis, or supervising individuals delayed in court processes because there's nowhere else for them to go, that is not a policing success story, but a sign of systemic failure. Police officers are too often left to pick up the pieces because mental health services are overstretched, community supports are underfunded, and justice processes are slow. That's unfair on officers, unfair of those in crisis, and unfair on communities who lose preventative, relationship-based policing as a result. If we want genuine community policing, then we must free officers to do that work. That means properly resourced mental health provision, investment in youth work and community services, and serious action on poverty and inequality. We all know that it is much better to prevent crimes happening in the first place than deal with the consequences once they've happened. So safety is not delivered solely through enforcement. It is built through prevention, dignity and care. That's where we believe our focus should be. But we also have to confront the issue of trust. Policing by consent depends on communities believing that the police will act fairly, proportionately and consistently. Where there is perceived overreach against peaceful protest or perceived inaction in the face of racist intimidation, trust is eroded. Where the application of laws around harassment or stirring up hatred appear inconsistent, communities take notice. Police Scotland must be willing to reflect honestly on this. Accountability is not an attack on policing. It is essential to strengthening it. Protecting the right to peaceful assembly, safeguarding those targeted by hate, and recognising patterns of harassment before they escalate are not optional extras. They are central to public safety in a democratic society. And finally, we need clarity about risk. While debate often centres on street violence, many of the most significant and growing threats are digital: online fraud, coercive control, radicalisation and cybercrime. Community policing in the 21st century must adapt to that reality. Resources and training must reflect where harm is actually occurring, not simply where headlines are loudest or the most sensational. My politics are rooted in social justice. I believe that safety and justice are inseparable. A society that tolerates racism, neglects mental health, or leaves people in poverty will never truly be a safe one, no matter how many officers we throw at the problem. If we are serious about safer communities, we must invest in prevention. We must uphold everybody's rights, challenge hate, and rebuild trust. That requires courage, consistency, and compassion. That is the standard we should set and the responsibility we all share. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call on Sharon Dowie to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Throughout this debate, we've heard from across the chamber the sheer importance policing holds in our society. We've heard rightly about officers' bravery, selflessness and commitment to keeping us, our friends, family and neighbours safe. But we've also heard how brutally undervalued they are. It's hard to think of a job in modern Scotland that is more dangerous and less rewarded and appreciated than that of a police officer. Some reasons for this aren't necessarily the fault of just the Scottish Government. Police officers operate in a dangerous world, where people are less respectful and more prepared to take dangerous actions against them. Crime is also evolving, and the range of threats facing the police and people they protect are growing at an alarming rate. Liam MacArthur spoke of the increasing complexity of crimes and the need for urgent action. Liam Kerr stated the statistics on the rise of serious crimes. Recorded crime up 2%, violent crime up 3%, sexual crime up 7%. And Claire Baker spoke of the issues in retail crime. But, Presiding Officer, many of the challenges they face are indeed a direct consequence of this Scottish Government's choices now and over many years. It seems a very long time ago that the SNP, as a party of government, committed to recruit an extra 1,000 police officers on the street, a decision they came to after being persuaded by the Scottish Conservatives. But latest statistics show that work has been undone and those extra 1,000 officers in the front line have dwindled back down to an unacceptably low level. And things are only projected to get worse. And Douglas Ross highlighted that the SNP amendment deletes the line regrets cuts to police officer numbers. They're staying silent about the cuts. Jo Farrell, the Chief Constable, told ministers exactly what she needed from the recent budget in order to just keep the show on the road. Instead, the Scottish Government delivered significantly less than that, a move which has been warned will lead to even more job cuts within Police Scotland. Yes.
Patrick.
Obviously, the budget's not been passed yet, so I just wonder what amendments the Conservatives will be making to increase the budget in justice and where that money will come from.
Sharon Dowie.
We can certainly cut the waste in the Scottish Government, but I would actually say that it was the Chief Constable that asked for a figure so that they could just stand still, and they're 15 million short of just that figure. They didn't even get that.
Members, please listen to the member who has the floor.
And it isn't just officers who felt the brunt. The Police Scotland estate is also being subjected to a fundraising fire sale, as Davy Russell mentioned in his contribution. All over Scotland, local stations are closing, and with that disappears the presence of police in towns and villages which have enjoyed strong local officers for generations, and the buildings which are left over are in dire need of repair. It's a disgrace that police officers are expected to operate from such despicable environments, especially at the end of or in the midst of unbearably gruelling shifts in the front line. As the motion suggests, community policing is being deliberately and relentlessly eroded. That means impressionable young people who may be on the fence when it comes to getting involved in offending have fewer positive role models nearby who might just talk them out of a life of crime. And the officers who may have been able to build positive relationships in sometimes challenging communities are simply not there anymore. And Pauline McNeill spoke of the increase in young people carrying knives, which is a huge concern. Presiding Officer, the SNP's inexplicable destruction of our police force has no winners. It leaves officers ill-equipped, underprepared and overburdened. That puts them at an unacceptable risk on the front line and leaves them more vulnerable to ill health of both physical and mental kind. And ultimately, it leaves communities exposed to criminals in a world where crime is becoming less predictable and more devastating. After almost 2 decades of negligence,
Ms Dowie, you will need to close.
And the people they are charged with protecting deserve more.
Thank you, Ms Dowie. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance to close on behalf of the Scottish Government. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I always listen very carefully to all members' contributions in any debates. I rarely read out a pre-prepared speech when closing, and instead I'm always trying to read my own handwriting. And also, Presiding Officer, I refuse to play games. I'm too old to fool around, and I certainly don't let anyone, or indeed any man, put words in my mouth. And I will exercise my right to use my 5 minutes in this debate as I see fit. Absolutely not. No, thank you. I do want to make the point, Presiding Officer, that when I listen very carefully, I also take a very close interest in what people are not saying or not doing. And to the best of my knowledge, there was no justice asks in negotiations or discussions that opposition spokespeople had with the finance team. Instead, what I hear in chamber is people opting out and then complaining. And every member in this chamber has to recognise that they all have power and they all have influence that can make a difference. And, Presiding Officer, as some members have mentioned, we have Labour's tax on jobs with the employer's national insurance contribution. That has certainly had a financial cost to policing. And then there's the bill of our VIPs of the state visit last summer. And I have not seen any standing up to Starmer on those issues. No, I will not. And, Presiding Officer, the other thing that members won't be saying, opposition members, is what they don't say, is they never say how much they will increase police and resource buying, and they will never say how much they will increase the additional headcount by. Instead, we will get figures plucked from thin air and discussions about how we will be releasing officers back to the front line. Presiding Officer, what always strikes me with sadness is that when we have a justice debate, and in particular a debate on policing, that we tend to debate the past as opposed to debate the future. And if I can be even-handed and balanced around police recorded crimes, yes, we've seen serious assault and attempted murder, absolutely not, dropped by 60%. Housebreaking dropped by 77%. These are all figures from 2006-07 to last year. Theft of motor vehicles down by 69%, vandalism down by 73%, and homicide at its lowest levels since records began in 1976. And with more people feeling safe, or report to feel safe, walking in their own community. But also the contrast to that, and this is where I will be even-handed as always. Violence against women and girls, up. Is that because of confidence in our justice system? In part. Or is it still because it remains a hidden issue? Cybercrime, growing concern. Online safety, growing concern. Shoplifting, indeed, a growing concern. That's why we're prepared to invest £3 million every year for the next 3 years. And, of course, we've seen those, nope, no thank you, no thank you. And as we have seen from the evidence by Police Scotland, there is increasing specialisms required to tackle serious organised crime, which Police Scotland, I can assure you, do very well. There's increased specialism required to investigate sexual crime. National security and counter-terrorism also place a demand on policing in Scotland. And at the same time, we have to also ensure that we have that balance with good community policing that is about prevention, because there is a connection between specialism and policing on the ground in our communities. So, Presiding Officer, let's start having a debate about the future of policing in Scotland as opposed to the past. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
I'm great, and I genuinely think this is a point of order. The Cabinet Secretary was very clear that she doesn't use pre-scripted remarks, and her closing would be a summation of everything that was said in the debate. She went on to reference things that were never mentioned in the debate, such as the cost of VIP policing. If the official record shows that was never mentioned in the debate, but the Cabinet Secretary tried to claim that was her unscripted remarks. Would it require a clarification to the official record?
I thank Mr Ross for his contribution. That is not a point of order. The Chair is not responsible for the contributions of other members, including Cabinet Secretaries. Is Mr Ross seeking to make another point of order? Or to seek to make a point of order, Mr Ross?
So it is not about the rubbish that we heard from the Cabinet Secretary. It's if she is making things up, having said they were previously mentioned in the debate and they were not, would that require a correction to the official record because she's making things up?
Mr Ross, as I've already explained, it is not a matter for the Chair as to the substance of a member's contribution, including the Cabinet Secretary, and it is entirely a matter for the Cabinet Secretary to contribute in the way that she chose to do so, and that's not a point of order. So, on that basis, I would now like to move to the closing speaker, who will be Neil Bibby, to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to close this debate on behalf of Scottish Labour, a debate that we brought forward to talk about the reality of policing in Scotland in 2026, to talk about the issues that there are in communities right across Scotland, and to talk about ideas for the future of policing in Scotland. Polly McNeill and members have emphasised the importance of local policing throughout this debate, and I want to join the many members in thanking our dedicated and brave police officers for the work that they do. In particular, I want to praise Chief Inspector Ian Farmer and his team at K Division in Renfrewshire and Inverclyde for the important work they are doing to tackle speeding and dangerous driving in the local area. I know from engaging with my constituents, as many members will, that they feel safer when police officers are visible and actively involved in their communities, responding to their concerns like these. They also have greater confidence in Police Scotland to tackle crime when it is properly resourced. I recognise the important work our police officers are doing across the country, yet our constituents and communities are feeling less safe today. The facts are, Cabinet Secretary, the number of people across Scotland who say they feel safe after dark is at the lowest point in record. Less than half express confidence in the police in the local area, down from 60% over a decade ago. Overall recorded crime rose last year, with violent crime up by 3% and a worrying 7% spike in sexual crime. And Claire Baker also talked on behalf of USDOT about the real impact that retail crime is having. The police, of course, are doing everything they can in difficult circumstances, but it's the first duty of government to protect its citizens. And on that count, this SNP government is failing, because the reason why our constituents and communities now feel less safe is due to the failures of this government on policing. The truth is, despite this Scottish Government coming to power promising to increase police officer numbers, they have failed to protect them. There are over 1,000 fewer police officers now than when Police Scotland was formed back in 2013. And I mentioned K Division and the important work that they are doing and the difficult circumstances they have to face. They've got 76 fewer police officers compared to that period as well. Continued cuts to police officer numbers have seen a loss of another 25 officers in recent months, adding to the loss of almost 100 in the past year. These cuts are also disproportionately affecting local officer numbers. Ahead of the budget, the Chief Constable, as many members have said, requested an additional £33.7 million to bolster frontline policing by recruiting an extra 850 officers. The Scottish Government failed to provide this investment, which means that we're likely to see further cuts in officer numbers at a time when crime is on the rise and confidence in local policing is failing. The recent Best Value report on policing in Scotland highlighted that workforce planning remains underdeveloped and that there is no evidence that the current officer numbers are sufficient to deliver an effective service. As other members have already highlighted in this debate, Scottish Labour will restore local policing to improve community safety. We will restore at least 360 officers to the front line in local divisions, ensuring that officers are once again visible and active participants in every community across Scotland. We will bring back crime prevention officers who will work to proactively prevent crime rather than just simply being reactive. And within the first weeks of a Scottish Labour government, new strategic police priorities will be set out to rebuild public confidence in local policing. This is vital to ensuring we have effective local policing across the country. Members have raised the other pressures affecting local policing capacity, which the Scottish Government have failed to address. One of these pressures is the fact that officers increasingly find themselves dealing with mental health-related incidents. Scottish Labour will act where the Scottish Government haven't, by creating a dedicated mental health emergency response division, reducing the number of police call-outs as a result. Another pressure on local policing capacity is the amount of time that officers have to spend in courts. The Chief Constable previously indicated that up to 420 officers a day were in courts across Scotland. This takes officers off the streets and out of their communities, which is why Scottish Labour will seek to address this with the rollout of new technology in the court system and by reviewing scheduling of cases. And perhaps the greatest pressure on local policing capacity is the stress and other mental health issues faced by many officers. Officer absences due to mental health and stress increased by over 50% between 2021 and 2024. More than 1,700 officers have quit in the last 2 years, leaving at a rate over 16 every week. So Scottish Labour will seek to improve pay, working conditions and mental health support in Police Scotland to both retain existing officers and attract new recruits. Mr Bibby,
I'd be grateful if colleagues who were joining us could do so quietly. Mr Bibby.
Particularly so, Presiding Officer, because the Cabinet Secretary was saying earlier that she wanted to talk about the future of policing, and we're presenting ideas that the Scottish Government are failing to deliver on. Members have also highlighted the loss of police stations and the negative impact that this has had on community safety. Around 180 stations and buildings have been lost since the creation of Police Scotland, right up and down the country. In my own region, we have seen the recent closures of Mulgai Station, Bishop Briggs Station and, even more scandalously, the closure of Fergusley Park Police Station in one of the areas with the greatest socio-economic needs in the country. More police stations are under threat, as David Russell has talked about, in terms of Larkhall, and he's right to raise that issue. And even those still operational are in a state of significant disrepair, including Paisley and Greenock in my own West of Scotland region, which I know my colleague Katie Clark has raised consistently. Scottish Labour is clear that we must properly fund the repair and maintenance of our stations to ensure that they are fit for purpose and able to serve local communities. Today's debate has rightly focused on the importance of ensuring that policing is properly staffed, resourced and firmly rooted in local communities. But it also illustrates the choice at the election in May: more decline and more crime with the SNP, or a new direction and support for our police with Scottish Labour. I would urge members to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Bibby. Thank you. That concludes the debate on community policing.